Captain Alexis Reeves stood in the doorway of the Military Flight Academy, her acceptance letter crumpled in her trembling fist as Colonel Harrison's laughter echoed down the hallway. "Women like you don't belong in fighter jets," he'd said, loud enough for every cadet to hear. "Find yourself a nice desk job." What he didn't know was that 12 years later, she would be the only person alive capable of saving his son's life. But this story isn't just about one woman's revenge. This is the story of the night when 2,400 innocent lives hung by a single phone call. Before we dive into this incredible journey, tell us in the comments from which city in the world you're watching this video today, and if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button. The Colorado Springs Air Force Academy gleamed under the autumn sun as 22-year-old Alexis Reeves walked through its gates for what she believed would be the beginning of her military career. She had dreamed of this moment since she was 5 years old, sitting in her father's F-16 cockpit, tiny hands gripping the controls. "Someday I'll fly these too," she had declared. Her father, a decorated Air Force pilot, had smiled and said, "Of course you will, little aviator." 18 years of preparation had led to this moment. Perfect grades in aerospace engineering, flawless physical conditioning, and flight simulator scores that made seasoned instructors take notice. Alexis had outperformed male candidates in every metric that mattered. Her application file was thick with recommendations, commendations, and achievements that should have guaranteed her acceptance into the elite pilot training program. But Colonel Harrison had different plans. The testing week had been brutal. Physical endurance challenges that pushed candidates to their limits, written examinations covering everything from aerodynamics to military strategy, and psychological evaluations designed to break the weak-minded. Alexis had excelled at every turn. While other candidates struggled with G-force simulation, she maintained perfect control. When others fumbled through complex navigation problems, she solved them with intuitive precision. "Outstanding performance," her flight instructor had noted after her final simulator run. "Natural instincts, exceptional spatial awareness, and nerves of steel. This candidate has everything we look for in a fighter pilot." But Alexis didn't know that Colonel Harrison had already made his decision before she'd even arrived. The rejection meeting took place in a sterile conference room that smelled of coffee and disappointment. Harrison sat behind a polished oak table, flanked by 2 other officers whose expressions revealed nothing. Alexis entered with confidence, certain that her performance had spoken for itself. "Miss Reeves," Harrison began, not bothering to look up from his paperwork, "thank you for your participation in our program." The word participation hit her like a slap. Not exceptional performance or impressive results. Participation, as if she had been merely playing along. "I'm afraid we won't be offering you a position in our pilot training program," he continued, finally meeting her eyes. "The Women's Integration Initiative isn't quite ready for full implementation. Perhaps you should consider support roles, intelligence, logistics, administration, very important work." Alexis felt the room spinning. "Sir, with respect, my scores." "Your scores are irrelevant," Harrison interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed without question. "This is about readiness, about unit cohesion, about the realities of combat that a young woman like yourself simply cannot understand." The other officers shifted uncomfortably, but none spoke up. This was Harrison's show. "But sir," Alexis pressed, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside her chest, "I outperformed." Harrison's laugh was sharp and cruel. "Women like you don't belong in fighter jets, Miss Reeves. Find yourself a nice desk job. Trust me, it's better for everyone." She didn't give them the satisfaction. "Thank you for your time," she said quietly, standing with the kind of dignity that comes from deep inner strength. "I hope someday you'll realize what you're losing." As she walked down that hallway for the last time, listening to Harrison's dismissive chuckle fade behind her, Alexis didn't know that she had just received the greatest gift of her life, the fuel of injustice that would drive her to heights Harrison could never imagine. But Alexis wouldn't learn this lesson until much later, and when she did, it wouldn't just change her life, it would save thousands of others. That night, in her small apartment near the academy, Alexis sat on her bed with her father's old flight manual in her lap. She could quit. She could accept Harrison's suggestion and find a safe, respectable career in aerospace engineering or air traffic control. She could let his words define the limits of her dreams, or she could prove him wrong. The decision, when it came, was swift and absolute. If the military didn't want her, she would show them exactly what they were missing. She would become a pilot on her own terms, in her own way, and she would be so good that they would have to notice. She picked up her phone and began searching for civilian flight schools. They didn't care that Alexis was a woman. They only cared that she could fly. And could she ever fly? Her instructor, a grizzled former Navy pilot named Jake Martinez, had seen a lot of students come and go. Most were competent enough, some showed real promise, but Alexis was something different entirely. "It's like she was born for this," he told his wife after Alexis's first solo flight. "Most students fight the aircraft, trying to force it to do what they want. Alexis talks to it. The plane does what she wants, because she understands what it needs." Alexis completed her private pilot license in record time, then immediately began working toward her commercial certification. "What's the rush?" Martinez asked her one day as she prepared for another demanding cross-country flight in deteriorating weather conditions. "I have something to prove," she replied simply. She earned her commercial license 6 months ahead of schedule and immediately began applying to airlines. The responses were mixed, but persistence paid off, and soon she found herself flying cargo routes for Mountain Express, a small outfit that specialized in delivering supplies to remote locations throughout the American West. The work was demanding and often dangerous. Night flights through mountain passes, landing on short strips in challenging weather, carrying everything from medical supplies to mining equipment to isolated communities that depended on air transport for survival. It was exactly the kind of experience that builds exceptional pilots if it doesn't kill them first. Alexis thrived in this environment. Where other pilots saw danger, she saw challenge. Where they saw limitations, she saw opportunities to excel. Her reputation began to grow throughout the tight-knit community of Western aviation. She was the pilot who would take the flights others wouldn't, who could land where others couldn't, who never said no to a challenge. Word of her abilities reached the major airlines faster than she had expected. Within 2 years, United Airlines offered her a position as a first officer on their regional routes. It was a significant step up, better pay, newer aircraft, more prestige. But more importantly, it was a chance to prove herself on a larger stage. Her captain on those early flights was David Chen, a veteran pilot with 20 years of experience who had seen his share of young hotshots come and go. He was initially skeptical of his new first officer. She was young, female, and came from the small-time cargo world. But it took exactly 1 flight for his opinion to change completely. They were flying from Denver to Phoenix when they encountered severe turbulence over the Colorado Rockies. The kind of rough air that makes even experienced passengers pray and flight attendants struggle to remain standing. Most first officers in such conditions would grip their armrests and let the captain handle everything. Alexis calmly suggested a slight altitude adjustment and course correction that would take them out of the worst of the turbulence. When Chen implemented her suggestion, the ride smoothed out immediately. "How did you know?" he asked, genuinely curious. "The cloud formations," she explained, "and the way the wind was behaving at our previous altitude. The turbulence was being channeled through that valley system. Moving up 1,000 feet and 5 degrees north puts us in cleaner air." Chen stared at her for a moment, then shook his head in amazement. "I've been flying these routes for 15 years, and I never would have thought of that." "You've been flying these routes Alexis said with a smile. "I've been flying these mountains." From that day forward, Chen became one of Alexis's strongest advocates. He recommended her for captain training ahead of schedule, vouched for her abilities to anyone who would listen, and made sure she got the challenging routes that would accelerate her development. Alexis's promotion to captain came faster than anyone expected, but by then her reputation had preceded her. But it was the Frankfurt incident that truly made her a legend. It was a routine transatlantic flight from New York to Frankfurt. Routine until the Airbus A380's number 2 engine suffered a catastrophic failure 30,000 feet over the North Atlantic. Engine failures happen, and modern aircraft are designed to handle them safely. But this wasn't a standard failure. The damaged engine had torn away from its mounting, taking with it hydraulic lines and electrical systems that controlled critical flight surfaces. The massive aircraft suddenly became a barely controllable beast, wallowing through the sky like a wounded whale. Captain Alexis Reeves was in command, with 387 passengers and crew depending on her to get them safely to the ground. The nearest suitable airport was Shannon, Ireland, still over an hour away. Her first officer was an experienced pilot, but he had never dealt with anything like this. "Mayday, mayday, mayday," Alexis broadcast on the emergency frequency. Air traffic control responded immediately, clearing all other traffic from their path and providing navigation assistance. But Alexis knew that getting to Shannon was only part of the problem. Landing a crippled A380 would require every bit of skill she had developed over years of flying in impossible conditions. Most pilots would have fought the aircraft, trying to force it to behave normally. Alexis did something different. She listened to what the plane was telling her. "It wants to fly," she murmured to her first officer as she made minute adjustments to the controls. "We just have to let it tell us how." For 57 minutes, she nursed the wounded aircraft across the Atlantic, making constant tiny corrections to keep it stable, working with its damaged systems rather than against them. When Shannon Airport came into view, the entire aviation world was watching. News helicopters circled at a safe distance, emergency vehicles lined the runway, and every air traffic controller in Europe held their breath. The approach was a masterpiece of precision flying. Too fast and the aircraft would overshoot the runway and crash into the sea beyond. Too slow and it would stall and fall from the sky. With limited control authority, Alexis had essentially one chance to get it right. She brought the crippled A380 down like a leaf settling onto still water. The landing was so gentle that some passengers later said they barely felt the touchdown. As the aircraft rolled to a stop, surrounded by emergency vehicles spraying foam, a cheer went up from air traffic control that could be heard around the world. Not a single person was injured. The aviation industry had found its new hero, and her name was Alexis Reeves. Awards and accolades followed. The International Federation of Airline Pilots Associations presented her with their highest honor. Aviation magazines featured her on their covers. Young women around the world started dreaming of becoming pilots because they had seen what was possible. But the person who needed to see Alexis's success the most wasn't paying attention. Colonel Harrison, now General Harrison, was too busy with his own career advancement to notice that the woman he had dismissed years earlier was rewriting the rules of aviation excellence. That would change soon enough. The call came at 3:47 a.m. on a November night that would change everything. Alexis was asleep in her London hotel room, resting between flights, when her phone rang with the distinctive tone reserved for emergency contacts. "Captain Reeves?" The voice was crisp, professional, tinged with barely controlled panic. "This is Commander Sarah Mitchell from NATO Air Command. We have a situation." Alexis sat up immediately, her mind shifting into the focused clarity that comes from years of emergency training. "What can I do for you, Commander?" "Are you familiar with electromagnetic pulse events? Solar flares, geomagnetic storms, that sort of thing?" "Exactly. We're experiencing an unprecedented electromagnetic event over Central Europe. 8 commercial aircraft currently in flight have lost all electronic navigation and communication systems simultaneously. We're talking about 2,400 souls at risk. Alexis was already reaching for her clothes. How long do they have? Fuel states vary, but we estimate between 2 and 4 hours before we start losing aircraft. The problem is that our military pilots are grounded. The same electromagnetic interference that's affecting the civilian aircraft is making it impossible for our fighter jets to operate safely. But you think I can help? There was a pause. Captain, we've reviewed your record. The Frankfurt incident, your mountain flying experience, your ability to operate in degraded conditions. We believe you might be our only option. What exactly are you asking me to do? Fly a specially shielded rescue helicopter into the affected zone and guide those aircraft to safety using visual navigation and radio relay. It's never been attempted before. Alexis was already dressed and heading for the door. Where do I need to be? NATO Air Base Geilenkirchen, Germany. We have a transport standing by to get you here. As Alexis climbed into the military transport that would take her into the most challenging night of her career, she had no idea that the man coordinating the operation from NATO headquarters was the same officer who had told her she didn't belong in military aviation. General Harrison stood in the Crisis Management Center, watching 8 blinking dots on a massive display screen that represented the aircraft in distress. Each dot represented hundreds of lives, families who were probably enjoying their evening meals while their loved ones flew unknowingly toward disaster. "Sir," his aide approached cautiously, "Captain Reeves is en route." Harrison nodded absently, then froze as the name registered. "Did you say Reeves?" "Yes, sir. Captain Alexis Reeves, Skyline International. She's the pilot who—" "I know who she is," Harrison interrupted, his voice hollow. The irony was not lost on him. The woman he had dismissed as unfit for military aviation was now the only person who could save this mission. The woman he had told to find a desk job was about to attempt something that no military pilot could do. When Alexis arrived at Geilenkirchen, the base was in controlled chaos. The specially equipped helicopter was waiting on the tarmac, its engines already spooling up. "Captain Reeves?" A young technician approached with a helmet and flight suit. "I'm Sergeant Adams. I'll be your systems operator for this mission. Find each aircraft, establish communication, and guide them to airports outside the affected zone using visual navigation. Simple in concept, impossible in execution." "Sounds like my kind of challenge," Alexis said, pulling on the flight suit. As she strapped into the pilot's seat, her radio crackled with an incoming transmission. "Captain Reeves, this is General Harrison, mission commander." Alexis's hands paused over the controls. After 12 years, there was no mistaking that voice. "General," she replied evenly, "I understand you have a situation." "Captain, we need you to understand that this mission is entirely voluntary. What we're asking is beyond anything in the operational manual. If you feel—" "General," Alexis interrupted, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had faced impossible odds before. "Those people up there don't care about the manual. They need help, and I'm here to give it to them." A long pause. Then, "Roger that, Captain. Good hunting." As the helicopter lifted off into the electromagnetic storm that was wreaking havoc across European airspace, Alexis couldn't help but smile. She had waited 12 years for this moment, not the crisis itself, but the chance to show General Harrison exactly what women like her were capable of. The first aircraft she found was a British Airways flight en route from London to Rome, wandering aimlessly at 35,000 feet with no idea where they were or where they were going. Through her radio relay, Alexis established contact with the confused crew. "British Airways 256, this is your guardian angel. I'm flying a helicopter below you and I'm going to guide you home." "Thank God," came the relieved voice of the captain. "We've been flying blind. Our passengers are starting to panic." For the next 30 minutes, Alexis guided the airliner through the night sky using landmarks she could see from her low altitude. Highways, city lights, distinctive geographical features. "Beautiful approach," she told the British Airways crew as they touched down safely at Munich. 1 down, 7 to go. The second aircraft was more challenging, a cargo flight that had wandered far off course and was running dangerously low on fuel. Alexis had to guide them to a military airfield that was barely long enough for their aircraft, using a navigation technique she had learned flying supplies to remote mountain airstrips. As the night wore on, each rescue became more complex, more challenging. Fuel was becoming critical for the remaining aircraft, weather was deteriorating, and the electromagnetic interference was actually intensifying. But Alexis pressed on, drawing on every skill she had developed, every lesson she had learned, every ounce of determination that had driven her to prove herself worthy of the cockpit. By dawn, she had guided all 8 aircraft to safety. Not a single life was lost. The operation that military analysts said was impossible had been completed by a woman who had been told she wasn't good enough to serve her country. When Alexis finally landed her helicopter back at Geilenkirchen, she was exhausted, dehydrated, and running on pure adrenaline. As she climbed out of the cockpit, she found General Harrison waiting for her on the tarmac. For a long moment, they looked at each other across the years of hurt and vindication. Harrison's face showed the full weight of his recognition, not just of her extraordinary performance that night, but of the magnitude of his error 12 years earlier. "Captain Reeves," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "I owe you an apology, a profound, inexcusable apology." "General," Alexis replied quietly, "you don't owe me anything. Those 2,400 people whose lives we saved tonight, that's what matters." "No," Harrison insisted. "I need to say this. 12 years ago, I made the worst decision of my military career. I let my prejudices blind me to excellence. I told you that women like you didn't belong in fighter jets. I was wrong. You don't belong in fighter jets. You belong in command of them." Alexis studied the man who had shaped her destiny in ways he could never have imagined. "General, I won't pretend that your rejection didn't hurt, but in a strange way, I'm grateful. If you had accepted me into the program, I would have become a good military pilot. Because you forced me to find another path, I became something more." "What's that?" "I became myself." The story of that night spread around the world faster than the electromagnetic storm that had caused it. Media outlets called it the miracle of Munich, the night aviation history changed, and the greatest rescue mission ever flown. But Alexis herself preferred a simpler description. Just doing my job. The aftermath brought honors and recognition that would have seemed impossible for a woman who had been told she wasn't good enough for military service. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. The United States Air Force announced the establishment of the Alexis Reeves Center for Aviation Excellence, a training facility dedicated to developing pilots who could operate in extreme conditions and degraded environments. General Harrison personally delivered the invitation for her to serve as the center's first director. "The military needs people like you," he told her during their final meeting. "We need people who see possibilities where others see limitations, who find solutions where others find excuses. We need people who prove that excellence has no gender, no background, no restrictions other than those we place on ourselves." Alexis accepted the position, not because she needed vindication. She had already proven everything she needed to prove, but because she saw an opportunity to ensure that other young women would never face the barriers that had once seemed insurmountable to her. On her first day as director, she found a letter on her desk. It was from a teenage girl in Ohio who had watched the news coverage of the rescue mission and decided to pursue her dream of becoming a pilot. "You showed me that when they say you can't fly," the letter read, "what they really mean is they can't imagine how high you might soar." Alexis smiled and pinned the letter to her bulletin board, right next to the crumpled acceptance letter she had carried with her for 12 years. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from the doors that open for us, but from the ones that close, forcing us to build our own entrance to the sky. Today, Captain Alexis Reeves is remembered not just as the pilot who rewrote aviation history, but as the woman who proved that excellence cannot be contained by prejudice, that determination cannot be defeated by discrimination, and that sometimes the best response to being told you can't fly is to take to the skies and show them exactly what impossible looks like. Her story reminds us that the greatest barriers we face are often not the physical limitations of our dreams, but the limited imagination of those who claim to know what we're capable of achieving. In the end, Alexis didn't just prove that she could fly. She proved that when someone tries to ground your dreams, the only appropriate response is to take flight and show them what they never saw coming. If this story moved you, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like Alexis's deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button and share this with someone who needs to remember that no one has the right to tell you how high you can fly. Thank you for watching the Human Stories channel, where we believe that the most extraordinary journeys often begin with someone saying, "You can't," and end with you proving them magnificently wrong.